The discovery of the empty tomb is one of the climactic high points of the Gospels. As we read in the Gospel traditions, the stone is rolled away from the grave, but the body is nowhere to be found. But in the rush to move from the moment of crucifixion to the resurrection, we often skip over the actual burial of Jesus. In the aftermath of the crucifixion, the Gospels present a chaotic scene. The disciples have gone into hiding, there's a rush to ensure the crucified individuals die before sunset, and there is seemingly no burial plan for the body of Jesus. Then, suddenly, an apparent stranger enters the story to take care of the burial. His name? Joseph of Arimathea. But who is he, and how did he come to play such an important role in the Gospel narratives? Hey, I'm Jordan Jones, managing editor of Bible and Archaeology. As we know from the Gospel traditions, following his trial, Jesus was found guilty by Pontius Pilate and was sentenced to die on a wooden cross. In the wake of his death, the various Gospels give us a few different series of events and reactions. Matthew tells us tales of tombs being opened and the dead walking again. Luke and Mark tell us of the temple curtain being torn in two, and John tells us of Jesus' body spilling water and blood alike. While the Gospels differ in their miraculous post-crucifixion details, they all agree when it comes to discussing the individual responsible for the burial of Jesus. In all four of the Gospel accounts, following the death of Jesus, we're introduced to a man named Joseph from the town of Arimathea. While the exact location of Arimathea is not known, according to scholars of the Omnosticon, a work written by the Christian apologist and historian Eusebius of Caesarea, Arimathea should be identified with Ramathaim Zophim, the birthplace of the prophet Samuel, near the modern Ben Gurion airport in Israel. However, others argue for the identification of Arimathea with Beit Rima, north of Jerusalem, based on the 6th century Madaba map. Joseph is described as a wealthy follower of Jesus, albeit secretly. In Mark and Luke, he's said to be a member of the Jewish council, the Sanhedrin. While all of Jesus' disciples have gone into hiding to avoid similar persecution, Joseph, an apparent stranger, builds the courage to approach Pilate and ask to remove Jesus' body, and then prepares it for burial in a new tomb carved into rock. While he reportedly acts alone in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, in the Gospel of John, we are introduced to yet another man, Nicodemus, who has also come to aid in the burial. With a mix of myrrh and aloe, Nicodemus and Joseph embalm and wrap Jesus in cloth, lying him in the tomb. So we have our burial party. But why did Joseph ask to remove Jesus' body from the cross? To understand this question, we need to consider a few different aspects of Jewish tradition. While the Synoptic Gospels, that is Matthew, Mark, and Luke, state that Jesus was crucified on the day of Passover itself, John states that the crucifixion took place on the day of preparation before the Passover. Thereby, John has Jesus being crucified on the day before the Passover, a holy day in Judaism. And as Jewish law prohibits work from being done on the Sabbath, burial preparations needed to be made that same day, so as not to require the preparation of the dead for burial after the Sabbath had begun. Hence, the rush in Joseph asking Pilate to remove and prepare Jesus' body. Josephus presents a description of burial customs in Book 4 of his work Jewish War that can potentially help us understand this scene, as he puts additional emphasis on the importance of burial customs to Jews. However, as is always the case with Josephus, we need to take his version of events here with a grain of salt. It's also important to note that the they Josephus refers to in the following scene are not the Romans, but the Idumeans, a group he disdains. Josephus states that, quote, they actually went so far in their impiety as to cast out the corpses without burial, although the Jews are so careful about funeral rites that even malefactors who had been sentenced to crucifixion are taken down and buried before sunset. Deuteronomy 21:22-23 can help us understand more of what Josephus describes here, as the text presents a series of guidelines on how to handle the death of a convicted criminal who's been executed on a tree. If we interpret the wooden cross as the tree described in Deuteronomy, it becomes easy to see the potential context behind Josephus' story, and why John reports that the Jewish community would ask for the legs of the 3 criminals to be broken so they could no longer push up with their legs and take a breath, causing them to suffocate and die more hastily, so that the bodies could be taken down and buried before the Sabbath day. But at this point, we have to stop and ask, would the Romans have even allowed for this to happen? Is it even feasible that a stranger could have claimed and buried the body of a convicted criminal? While trying to use other instances of Roman crucifixion to understand this scene can be helpful, they can also present such a wide variety of circumstances and situations as to almost be unhelpful. What we can say from what we know is that it was common for Romans to leave the bodies of crucified individuals hanging, allowing their bodies to serve as a forceful reminder of Roman power and governance. Then, after the crucified are confirmed dead and they've served their purpose as Roman propaganda, they would end up in a mass grave, which eventually evolved into mass cremations. However, it is worth noting that several accounts allege that the Roman governor Verres, who governed Sicily in the 1st century BCE, allowed families to pay to remove bodies and bury them, and that some archaeological remains point towards the allowance of family burial. But again, the variety of Roman practice is so wide that it's impossible to say exactly what is possible or impossible here. So while he is a relatively unknown figure in the scope of the Gospel's wider narrative account of Jesus' life, the wealthy noble Joseph of Arimathea, perhaps out of commitment to a sense of custom, tradition, propriety, or decency in his community, or perhaps as a secret follower of Jesus, wanting to ensure he has a proper burial, becomes an important individual for their accounts of the resurrection, as all 4 Gospels record that Joseph is the individual responsible for the burial of Jesus. So you can thank Joseph of Arimathea, and maybe even Nicodemus, for making the scene at the empty tomb possible. Until next time.